Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to share my presentation, Code Breakers and Knowledge Makers. And I'd like to share my journey over really the past decade and moving my district and transforming following structured literacy. A little bit about me. I grew up in Bellevue, Pennsylvania, if anyone is familiar with that area. It's a little bit outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Went to a very small school called Northgate, and I would consider myself math brained. I grew up with two parents who were accountants, and so most people remember their parents reading them stories when they were little. I can remember sitting at the kitchen table with my dad as a really small student practicing my math facts. And so as I got a little bit older, I was lucky to know from a very early age that I always wanted to be a teacher. And I thought that I was going to be a math teacher the entire time. I went to Slippery Rock University. I studied elementary education. Straight from there, I received my master's in education with my reading specialist degree. And right after, I was lucky enough to be hired at Blairsville Salzburg School District, which is the same district that I work at currently. We renamed ourselves. We had a rebranding. We're the River Valley School District. I was a reading specialist in the district for 15 years and then moved into the district literacy coach. And now I am the director of curriculum and instruction. The reason why I shared initially that I was math brained is because when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, my mom had said to me, you should probably just go back right away, get your master's degree. Right now, people are subbing from a really long time. Sub a little bit, get your master's. And when I was looking at all the programs, I figured I might as well get a degree, receive another certification. And that would be the reading specialist certification. So I started my program and I was just fascinated by reading. I spent 2 years, probably a year and a half in that program, and immediately was hired. And I can remember starting as a beginning teacher and my first small group of students having kindergartners sitting in front of me and thinking, I have no idea how to teach these kids how to read. And they're sitting there looking at me and I know about the alphabet. I know there are high frequency words. How do I teach them how to read? And so that's what my presentation is about today, sort of that journey of being that brand new teacher and realizing that I really don't know much about reading. And now I have kids who depend on me because really their life depends on it. A little bit about River Valley School District, just because I think it's interesting, is we are about 140 square miles. We are in Indiana County, and we also sit in Westmoreland County. We have 7 schools. We have a pre-K all the way up through 12th grade, and we also operate our own cyber academy, and we've newly added a STEAM academy, which is similar to almost like a CTC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that ties into the work that we're doing at the elementary level. 52% of our population is free and reduced lunches, and we specifically design our instruction to meet career pathways, and we do that starting in kindergarten. So about that journey, I was hired in 2008 and realized that first year that I really don't know much about teaching reading. And so what am I going to do about it? My district purchased a new intervention program, one that we hear about a lot, Leveled Literacy Intervention, LLI. And I was excited to start with it. I heard lots about it. Most school districts were using the whole language, balanced literacy. And that's really all that I knew about was, I make that joke now when I talk to people, but it was kind of, here's a book, rub it all over you, and hopefully you'll learn how to read. And so I had groups of students, and some of them I would consider, we talk about those bubble students that were closer to proficiency where they needed to be. And then our lowest performing, our most struggling students. And I remember them in that program. And my students who were closer to proficiency, they did okay. But my most struggling students, they were not moving at all. I had a coworker, my partner, who was also a reading specialist. She was hired about the same time as me. She had been in and out of working in school districts. She also hired or raised her own children, came back into working, and she was partnered up with me, and she was noticing the same thing. Her being hired was one of the best things that happened, because we started talking and said, LLI is not working. We are not equipped with the tools to make our students read, and we need to figure this out. So what are we going to do about it? And so together we started to research interventions. And so when we were digging through all of the research, we realized that there was over 40 years of brain research. We could not believe it. 40 years, and we had barely heard a thing about it. And so we were sort of like the two with the megaphones in our district telling everybody, did you know this? Did you hear about this? You know, and it was at that time where most people, you couldn't even say the D word, dyslexia. And so we started talking about it a lot, and really reaching out. That thanks to Patton, they were a very, very huge part of this journey that we've been on, because they partnered with us a lot and talked us through this. And so we went back to our district administrators, and they were a huge part of helping us with this journey, because though they had just spent all of this money on LLI, they listened to us. And we said, this program is not working, and we need to start working with interventions that will help our students read. And here is why, and this is what we need to include. We need to start talking about phonics. We need to be code breakers. And so they told us, because my partner and I were working on it in one elementary building, you take those materials and you put them up on a shelf. We trust you. And what can we buy for you? And so my partner had quickly done research. It was one of those instances where budget is due tomorrow, so you have a few hours to figure out what do you want. And so we decided to go with Barton Reading and Spelling. And over the next summer, we researched everything we could about how to implement phonics, because to be honest, many of those rules I did not know myself. I could not remember how I learned how to read, but looking back, I know that I was taught with balanced literacy. I didn't know the CK rule. When do you spell with C? When do you spell with K? And when I learned about how phonics works, I remember thinking back, well, if somebody would have just told me that many years ago, it would have made reading and especially spelling a whole lot easier. And so when school started the next year, we started implementing Barton Reading and Spelling. We also purchased rewards. Coming from someone who did not know phonics, wow, was that a tough one to implement rewards from the beginning, because you barely know phonics and you're implementing that. And what we noticed was our students were making gains, but not enough. We needed to know more. And so we finally had our big break. My partner, Kim, and I, we wrote a CIZ grant, which stood for Community Innovation Zone. The grant that we wrote was, can we remediate dyslexia in a public school? And our district was chosen, and we received over 3 years, $225,000. Though for maybe some districts that may seem like a small amount of money, for us it was huge, because our building encompassed about 225 students. So you figure that's a large sum of money to spend in one building to see what we could do. With that money, one of the first things that we did was we were able to purchase Orton Gillingham training. And the district saw its value. And so from that, all teachers in my district, kindergarten through 8th grade, were able to receive that Orton Gillingham training from IMSE is where we had chosen. We also put a huge, huge emphasis on teaching foundational phonics to all of our teachers. And then from there, we moved to advanced phonics. So now we needed ourselves to understand what phonics was, because when you talked, especially to our middle school teachers, they, like me, had no idea what phonics really was. How were we going to teach it? In addition to that, we had moved away from a balanced literacy core program and had moved to Journeys. And we know that that was not ideal at the time, but it was better than what we had before. And so we started to supplement our core program. We had then learned about the importance of phonemic awareness, and so we had purchased Haggerty. One of the best things that ever happened in my building was we were trained in ECRI. And so we placed ECRI in kindergarten through second grade. And then we eventually added the pre-teach and reteach, so that we could add that as our tier 2 portion. And then we did a creation of a decision tree and started down the MTSS route. We received patented tier 3 problem solving grants. And through that, we then made our if-then chart. So if a student is struggling in one of those 5 pillars, what are we going to do about it? So that was our if-then. If they are struggling in phonics, we are going to give them this. If they are struggling in fluency, we are going to give them this. And so we started to build a system of code breaking, is what I would consider at that point. And so we were really on our way, and we felt really good about where we were. We'd come a long way in, I would say, probably about 5 or 6 years. So we celebrated our positives. The biggest one was we had a lot of growth. We had an assessment schedule. Through the years, we had used Dibbles, which then we moved to Acadience. And we did a really good job at including progress monitoring. We wanted to make sure that we had enough data points to then go back and say, is this intervention working with our students? We had tons of high quality intervention materials and supplements, specifically through that CIZ grant that helped us. And we had research gurus. So my partner and I were working. I had a phenomenal principal that started with me in the beginning. She was hired as the principal the year that I was hired, and she was dedicated to learning about the science of reading. And then we had lots of teachers in different grade levels that really wanted to make this work and were sort of like head teachers. And so there were people in my building that definitely bought in quickly. And so we didn't have a ton of resistance. Once we showed them, look, what we were doing wasn't working, they agreed that they themselves didn't really know how to teach a child how to read. Eventually, when Sold a Story came out, I sort of have to admit, I felt like a rock star, because that was the story that we had been trying to tell everybody. And so it was kind of like, hey, you guys have to listen to this. This is what we've been doing here forever. And it really made the entire staff feel really good about where we've been and the path we've been on for a really long time. But I do have to admit that there was this aha moment for us. When we started, we sort of thought that all of our struggling students must have been on that continuum of dyslexia, because, you know, they do say that when students show symptoms of dyslexia, it is nothing else. However, we were missing that piece that is true, except if you are a student who has not had access to that high quality instruction. And so we were having students that were labeled with specific learning disabilities who probably didn't have one. It was the fact that they were going through a system, maybe not in the elementary building that I was in, but maybe one of our other elementary buildings that was not receiving the same sort of professional development that our building was having. And they didn't have that background in the science of reading that some of the teachers did on our end of the district. And so we realized that those students were missing that explicit systematic literacy instruction, or they were missing that engagement piece. We really learned about engagement from our ECRI piece that we added. And so we can make sure that we have a system that is explicit and it's systematic, and we come back to it and we teach our students over and over again. But when we were trained by Jess Searles, I remember her using Journeys, which was our core material at the time, and she looked at about the first 10 minutes of a first grade lesson. And I remember we walked through what the textbook had asked a first grade teacher to do with their classroom. And in that first 10 minutes, if you followed the script, you would have 7 students respond in 10 minutes. Well, we know what that would look like in a classroom. you lose students. I mean, as an adult, I would be lost in 10 minutes. You're looking out the window, you're touching your neighbor. And then we overlaid ECRI. So we were teaching the exact same thing, but we were putting routines in and asking all students to respond in that quick and explicit fashion. And so we went back to that beginning, taught the exact same thing, but used the ECRI script. And I believe it was 127 times students responded in that 10 minutes. And when we added that explicit systematic piece, we saw our literacy scores soar. And so we knew that that was the piece we were missing. So where do we need to improve? And we've been talking about this a lot, you know, especially yesterday when I was listening in on sessions. Tier 1. Really, we were focusing on interventions, but we had a tier 1 problem. And so through that, we needed to adopt a new reading series. We knew that Journeys just wasn't cutting it. And so what we did was we used the curriculum evaluation guideline from the Reading League. And I hope that if you are starting this journey, I hope that you look into that. And a lot of people, you'll see that the Facebook pages are excellent. And so if you're looking into some series and you want to see what other people are saying, it's very helpful to see what's out there, but you have to choose what is good for your district. And that's a very important piece that I wanted to portray during this presentation. Our district chose in the end to really review 3 series. And so we looked at the next series after Journeys because that was something we were comfortable with, just knowing that we really weren't going to choose it. But it was where we were moving from. And a lot of people loved ECRI. And so that was a hard piece to leave is and into reading. It lost me for a minute. So we were looking at into reading for the pure fact that some people said, I want to know what it looks like because I love ECRI and I love that overlay and I don't want to miss that piece of it. And so it's hard for me to leave that. The second series that we looked at was Open Court through McGraw-Hill. And we looked there because we've known that they were known for many, many years as having a sound foundational piece in the science of reading. Though not well known maybe for some time. And so that was definitely one we wanted to look at. And then we also wanted to look at CKLA because there was a lot of talk around that knowledge piece. And we really went back and forth very quickly. We knew that into reading was out just because they were trying to sell the 2 houses. So they're saying, yes, we are structured literacy. But then when you open up the book, they're talking to the balanced literacy folks. And so we just knew that right away, that was not something that we could that wasn't a place we could go. And so we walked through the curriculum evaluation guideline. We went through that reviewer's workbook for both programs for Open Court and for CKLA, knowing that both programs are very strong following the science of reading. But they both focus on 2 different pieces. I believe that Open Court is looking more so at the foundational piece and trying to build up that phonemic awareness and phonics piece. It's just very strong, very systematic. And that I believe is where its main strengths are. And CKLA, I believe, even though it has both strands pieces, I know there's 2 pieces to it, that is most well known for its knowledge building piece. And so our team sat down and we worked through those workbooks, and it took a very long time because you're looking for pieces of it and what did they match it? Did they hit it? Does it have, you know, components for your English language learners? I mean, it's that specific as you walk through it. In the end, both programs did what we thought. They both did very well in the review. However, our district chose to go with Open Court. Why? Because we felt like we needed to focus on the foundational skills. We felt like that was where, especially in one of our buildings, we really needed to focus there. And then we could focus on building the knowledge later. It was something we thought maybe we could add a piece to it after we received the open court. Luckily, after we purchased open court, we also found that they had wrote an overlay for ECRI. So we were able to add back that repetition, and the teachers were thrilled. We do a lot of professional development in my district, and sometimes for teachers, it's very hard to get back into things, maybe on a very early morning or on a long, 6-7 hour day. And when we have had ECRI trainings, the teachers just can't wait to be there. And so they were thrilled that it was coming back. We were also able to purchase UFly to match with our tier 3. And I must say that we are seeing absolutely fantastic results with that. I am adding that we are hoping for an advanced phonics intensification lesson coming from ECRI. Right now, they have the phonics intensification that's looking from the alphabet from A to Z. But I've heard that there are some talks about moving from there, and I'm hopeful that that is going to happen, just so that we could really align all 3 of our tiers so that our students are using the same system. And then always knowing that you want to have other pieces, because if something isn't working, you always want to have more tricks in your bag. I also think that it's important to know that when you talk about your students, they are not the tiers, and tiers are also not programs. So you might be using a program with a student and it's not working. That doesn't mean you move to another program. It might mean that you change the amount of time you're in the program. It might mean that you change the amount of students that are in the program. So that's something to be mindful of. And that is something that our district has really stuck to. In our intervention groups, we really try to stick to 4 or 5, even with our students who are in tier 2, just because we know that the effects of keeping small groups and the time that's spent with each student. And so that has been a focus really through this whole transformation, is sticking to those smaller groups. So what pieces were missing? Well, consistent administration. And unfortunately for the other elementary building that I was not in initially, over 16 years, I had the same principal in my building, and the other elementary building had 11 principals in 16 years. And I was listening to Stephanie Stoller yesterday in her presentation, and I even hurried up and pulled out my cell phone because she had talked about the importance of a principal and their building. And I completely agree that leadership is so very important in a building. And my second bullet jumps onto that: knowledge by all stakeholders, specifically administrators. We have lots of administrators that come in, and you might have a person who taught high school biology who is now the principal of an elementary building. And so making sure that all of our stakeholders understand structured literacy. Another big one is that commitment to continued professional development. And what do I mean by that? Because I have it written backwards: year 12 to year 1 adoption. When we left Journeys, we were actually about year 12 adoption. We had purchased the first publication, and then we had repurchased another publication by Journeys. And when we switched over to Open Court and we're just implementing this past year, someone said to me as I was doing some professional development, "Wow, I can't imagine the amount of phone calls that you receive from our teachers and the types of professional development you need to do. I bet your phone is ringing like crazy. I bet you're receiving a million emails." And I stopped, and right away I knew that the answer, and I'd said to them, actually, I'm receiving about the same, to be honest, because teachers need continual professional development. And they were actually shocked to hear that answer as an administrator. Really? Like, yeah, absolutely. And some of our best teachers constantly were calling me in year 12, because as you continue to read research continues to change. And so what are we going to do, even with a program like Journeys, to keep up with this, to make sure that we're doing the best for our students? And so for everyone that's listening, is what can you do in your districts to continue to provide that professional development? And so some people think, you know, we've taught this, we've taught it once, maybe we've cycled back to the professional development twice, and now everybody has it, we're good. Or, you know, when new teachers come in, we're going to give them this professional development and then everybody's on board. But if you don't do something every single day, or it's not always at the front of what you're doing, you need those refreshers to come back to them. So just something very important to think about is, what are you going to do to have that commitment to that continued professional development? And then the last piece is how important that team is in a different grade level, and how important teacher placement is. That was something that our district did, that we planned for an entire year, going to our union and saying, we are committed to literacy and we want to put our teachers in the best place for them, in the best place for our students. And so literacy is our number one focus. And so we are going to be shifting all of our teams and all of our teacher placements based on what we think is best for teachers with their input, and best for students, looking at data, looking at teacher surveys, and just lots of pieces to make it come together. And so we did that just at the end of this year. And I have to tell you that we went back to the drawing board about 36 times, because once you shifted one person, then it was like the domino effect. But we wanted to make sure that we got it right, so that now teachers will stay in those places. And initially, it caught teachers by surprise and they were worried about where their placement was. And we assured them that if you are a fourth grade teacher who is very strong at writing and you're working on, you know, TDAs all of the time, and that is your strength, you're most likely, very likely, not somebody we are going to place in kindergarten then. So we are working on your strengths to do what's best by students. But we could see people who needed shifted, and we needed teams where we would make sure that we had a team that had that leader, because we did have groups of teams that did not maybe have somebody that was that research guru or that leader that was sort of guiding the structured literacy path. And so we wanted to make sure that every team had a strong leader and a group of people that they could work with well, and that everybody was in the right place. So that was definitely very important to us. And then after we rolled out and had our implementation year with Open Court, we also knew that knowledge was so very important. So that was our big missing piece of the puzzle. So we worked on the code breaker piece, but now we need the second piece, the knowledge maker piece. So what are we going to do about the knowledge maker? And the Knowledge Matters podcast, if you have not listened to it, it is absolutely phenomenal. And you must listen to understand that whole second piece after breaking the code. That's not, you know, the only piece of structured literacy. And I think that sometimes that's the impression that people get. And so we need everyone to understand that there are many pieces, and those 5 pillars are all very important to creating a comprehensive reader. And so the importance of being that knowledge maker, well, it talks about, you know, structured literacy emphasizes the explicit systematic teaching of all areas of literacy. And the knowledge building fits, and I really wanted to do this slide just because it's something newer we've been talking about, but the vocabulary development. We talk about always engaging in high quality text, but we need diverse text, and really talking about that vocabulary, comprehension skills, contextual learning. So providing that background knowledge is very important. So the area that I teach in is a little bit more rural. And we have some students when we go to field trips to the city of Pittsburgh that have never been to the city. And so there are many vocabulary words that for them are not words that they use in their everyday language. And then the last piece is very important, which is that engagement and motivation. So using knowledge-rich activities to increase that engagement, to make it more interesting and relevant. And we do that through our high engaging text. So we needed to build our knowledge basis through Open Court, but how were we going to do that? And so what I did was I put out a document for our teachers to think about what they were going to do. We have Open Court, they have 3 bands, they call it. And so the green band is the piece that looks at phonics and phonemic awareness, and they are very strong in that area. And then they have a red band, which is their comprehension and vocabulary. They are strong in that area because they have high quality texts. They do a really great job choosing vocabulary words, and the way that they present them and the way that they make students apply them follows the technique that we would know would be sound. Anita Archer would love the way that they do it. I can hear her voice when I present it sometimes to students. They do a really nice job with that. However, they're not building enough. And so we found that we would need to add more in that red band area to expand their knowledge, to give them more than just that one-time snapshot. And I'll show you how they've added thematic units across the entire building to make that easily happen. And then the last band for them is the blue band, which is their writing, spelling, and grammar piece. And so when I put out this piece, I talk about we have a win time during each day, which stands for what I need. And I said to them, that's where we want to consider whatever we are doing in our open court week or our thematic unit. That's where we need to start adding other pieces of knowledge. And so what we need to do is we need to add other articles. We need to add additional short stories. We need to add picture books, novels. We need to watch video clips. We can go on virtual field trips. And so digging deeper into the knowledge that they have based around what Open Court has provided for us. So they've given us a nice foundational piece for comprehension. They've given us great vocabulary words, but now we need to build upon it. And so during that win time, we have students who are going to intervention groups, but we have large groups of students who are also staying with the classroom teacher or with somebody else. What can we do with them? Well, this is beneficial for every student who is staying there, specifically our high achieving students. And then we also have times where maybe an interventionist is not available. Any student that is sitting in this WIN class that receives knowledge building will benefit from it. The best piece about knowledge building too is that the teacher can guide it. And so I've explained that, you might have a group of students that are struggling readers, and maybe they're in your group that day as you're working on a piece about Asia, and they may not be able to work through that text themselves, but that's okay because you can read it because you're helping build that knowledge. This is the thematic chart that Open Court uses. And so you can see that, for example, the first unit in kindergarten through 5th grade, everybody is looking at character. Second unit, major unit, is changes, communities, life science, government, and creativity. And so what we're starting to do is build a database based around those large thematic units. Specifically for us, we want to have things around the character, which is like our social emotional learning. And we want to build around social studies and science. And so Open Court has done a fantastic job setting up sort of the shells for us. And so that is where we've started to build our knowledge piece that I'll explain a little bit further. Our district uses career exploration using RIASEC language. That's the third piece of this knowledge building. And what RIASEC is it's really a framework for our students to think about their interests. And so it reminds, if you know about the Myers-Briggs test that you've taken before, maybe, it's sort of thinking about how you think, what you do, where you align. And so every student in our district has taken a RIASEC assessment and has been given letters that align with their interests, their values, to academics, and eventually maybe where they will see themselves later in career. And so we sort of talk about it like a career exploration. And when this first came up, I have to admit, I was still in the elementary building, and I was thinking to myself, so we're going to have kindergartners focusing a good amount of time on career exploration. I would be very curious to see how this goes. And I must say that it has been absolutely phenomenal to watch. It starts out talking about what you actually like to do. And so, for example, when we start talking to our kindergartners, we say things to them like, do you like to build with blocks? Because if a child likes to build with blocks, they may eventually like to build and do construction. Maybe they want to be an architect. Maybe if there's somebody that likes to color with crayons, eventually they are going down the A line, the artistic line, and they're doing something with computers and media. And so we talk to them more about interests and where we move from there. This common language we use throughout kindergarten through 12th grade. And so initially when we rolled out RIASEC, we set aside special times where everybody just explained, this is RIASEC, these are the letters. R is realistic, I is investigative, A is artistic, S is social, E is enterprising, C is conventional. And we did lessons to explain to the kids, this is what it means, these are things you would like to do, here are careers that are related to it. Eventually, we started shifting away from that because we just want it to be part of what we say and do. So as I'm in open court and I'm teaching a lesson in kindergarten, there's a lesson about Florence Nightingale. We just want the teacher to immerse and talk about how that fits into RIASEC, nursing. What are maybe some characteristics that somebody would have if they wanted to do this? And so we're watching it transform, and our students absolutely thrive. And now they use this language themselves. Here are some of the themes as I walk through. So the realistic people are people that work, they like the practical hands-on. So they would avoid careers eventually that like working with their hands. They like working with plants and animals. They like real world materials like wood, tools, machinery, outside work. And so when we're asking students questions, we may even say to them things like, I like to be outside. You can see how as a kindergartner, this makes sense to you. Many of our students fall into the realistic category. And so this helps us as a district know the types of things that our students like to do, not just for career later on, because really our goal is for all students to leave our district and be successful, whether that means going straight to workforce, whether that means going to a technical school, going to a four-year institution, but we want all students to leave and be successful after they leave River Valley School District. But it lets us know what they want to do while they're in our district. What clubs should we have? What activities should we be doing? What assemblies should we be holding for students? And so it's really driving a lot of the things that we're doing for students because we want to engage them. We want them to show up. Right now, across Pennsylvania, we're having an issue with attendance. And so this is one of those ways that we are trying to combat that. And it's also a very large piece of our social emotional PBIS. We find that when we talk to students about themselves and what they like, they want to spend more time with us and they open up more. And we've been very successful there. Investigative are people that really like to think. They search facts. They're our people who like communications, business, a lot of times education, human services, artistic. We were surprised at how many of our students really found an A somewhere in their code. Unfortunately, at the elementary level, our arts program was eliminated before I started working in the district, so before 2008. And it had been a fight for many years about bringing that back to the elementary program. And after we were able to show the school board how many of our students had an A in their code, as soon as we did that, we were, last year, we were able to add back an art teacher. And so now they have art in their specials program. And so there's many values because we want to stand by the things that we're saying we are doing. And so the district has done that. Social, students who like to help others. Most of our teachers either have an S at the beginning, it's their strongest code, or it's somewhere in there. Enterprising are people who work in business or persuaders. They like acting rather than thinking. They like to make decisions. Sometimes they take risks for profit. Arts, communication, business management, information technology. And the last one is C, conventional. We have few students that fall into this category as their strongest code. And these are people that like routines. They like to work for information. They like to file things. They like following the rules and following a leader. And so you can see some of the careers later on are business management, health, medical, and human services. And so all of our students fall into a code. I wanted to show you. So I have my badge for work here. And on the back, all students and all teachers have their codes listed. So you have your strongest code, your middle code, and then a lot of times you have 3, your weakest code. What is very unique is typically you can take an assessment. I have it in here later to find out what your codes are and see if it matches. And I suggest that you all do that. But you can also just even talk through. I don't know, as I was doing this, if you have some sense of maybe what your codes are. And sometimes they may be very close or off. So I fell in as an SEC. Conventional is my 3rd, but the next one I had A. I was 1 off between C and A. And actually, I probably am SEA. And so for yourself, you can sort of know too by talking through what your codes are. So every student knows their codes. And we've created a RIASEC hexagon so that students can see, hey, these are the things I'm interested in. When I have free choice, when I want to go to social clubs, I can plan them around this RIASEC. I want to show you this link here. Takes me to, so this is the ONET interest profiler. This is the RIASEC assessment that you can take. Lots of agencies use this, specifically the military, to help them decide where people who are enlisting would work best in the military. And so after today and listening to all of the other wonderful presentations, it would be really, if you want to go and take this or have some of the members of your family take it, it will then tell you what their codes are and then give you ideas for jobs. And then it also lists things like, this is the amount of money that you would make. And we actually dig even deeper to even the level of, this is about what reading level you will need to be successful in this job, because that's important for our students to understand. And we want them to be successful. And so what do we need to do to get them there? And so I wanted to share that with you. How did we integrate all of this? So where am I going with? We have RIASEC codes, we have open court, and we need to build our knowledge base. And so what we did was we created a world of work Canvas class. And what it was we created lessons. So we looked at open court and the weekly stories or the weekly themes. We went into the stories and we looked to see, were there any careers or interests of any of the stories, characters in the stories, and a lesson was created for any of the matches. And so we have a whole database built around the themes in open court. And so these lessons are specifically based on student interest. And then I'll talk about the other end of the knowledge building. And so these WOW lessons or the RIASEC lessons look at the open court themes and stories. They focus on the key vocabulary from those lessons. They work on hands-on simulations. They do meet a pro. So this was a 2nd grade lesson and the career was a chef. And you can see up at the top the RIASEC code. So the first strongest code was realistic. The second was enterprising. So they were 2 codes. This was the 2nd day of the lesson. There was a hands-on simulation, so how to make pancakes from scratch. There was a meet a pro, and so we used the Nepris video where they were able to talk back and forth with a local or with a chef. And then we did a cross-curricular activity with math. And then we also have success criteria where students can go back and talk about, here's the things that I learned to prove it. One of the most important things that we found through this is students also know things they definitely do not want to do. And we know that we have lots of students who leave our school districts and don't know what they want to do after high school. And we need to get better at that because, you know, my job has always, I've always said that my goal is I don't want literacy to hold my students back ever. I want them to be able to leave high school and be able to do whatever they want to do. And literacy is not going to hold them back. But I also want to make sure that they know what they want to do and that they have the literacy level to be able to do it. And so that's how this piece has tied into it. This piece has been so engaging for our students. You know, I wrote engagement, engagement, engagement. I tell this funny story. There was a second grade student this past year. I did not have, I never worked with him. He was a little bit of a tough cookie from what I'd heard. He was walking down the hallway and I was told that he really loved to talk about RIASEC and his codes and his interests. And so I stopped him and I said, hey, tell me a little bit about your codes. And he stopped me. And right away, he took my badge and he flipped it over and he looked at my letters and he said to me, wait a minute, your letters are SEC. Did you know that my letters are RIA? Now, this is a second grader. And I said, are you serious? And he told me, yep. And then he looked at me and he said, you know, if you and I were to be paired up together in class to work together, I wonder what would happen. It could be really good or it could be really bad. And then he kind of chuckled to me and he walked away. And I must tell you that every time I saw that student after that day, he stopped and talked to me. We had a conversation as if he had worked with me for years. And I could tell you so many stories over and over again because kids like to talk about themselves. And so that's the piece of this RIASEC and what it's done for us is really engagement with our students and getting to know them. And so we've incorporated RIASEC with our main literacy program, Open Court. And then from there, the second piece, we're building knowledge based on the stories. We're also using a concept question board, which comes with Open Court. And so what they want to do at the beginning of every thematic unit is they say, you know, put this up in somewhere in your room. And as you work through your unit, because all of the stories tied to the same theme for that unit, students can put up articles, they can write things, they can put questions they have, any new concepts they found. This was a fourth grade board, and it was, I just think that they did a phenomenal job. You can see that they found a picture and said that that person was social. So a lot of times RIASEC themes come out. I'd even said to the teacher when I saw all the newspaper articles the students were clipping and bringing in, and this was them explaining to other students the background knowledge and expanding knowledge on the thematic unit that they were working on. I said, I didn't even know that this many kids would have a newspaper being brought to their house. And she's like, well, some of them are getting articles from grandparents and things like that too. And now they're picking them up, you know, at the local sheet store, things like that. What was really interesting too is some students were bringing in, as you can see, the exact same articles because they both knew that that article attached to their theme, which I thought was really interesting. So they really understood what they were learning about. And so this element was super helpful and we've really capitalized on it in our district. And so now every classroom, K-5, that's our elementary level, has a concept question board for every unit in our Open Court series. And that's really helping with our knowledge building. We are currently, things that we're doing right now is we're working on a content theme Canvas course, just like we did with our RIASEC lessons. and they are being built by grade level. And those lessons, they kind of parallel the RIASEC WOW, the lesson plan you just saw. And what we're doing is using specifically really the two main websites are ReadWorks and Common Lit. And they have high quality text. So if we're working on a unit about Africa, because we read a story, we will then take from there key vocabulary and we will find other texts to connect to that. If we're working on an life science, a life science unit, we're going to then build from there using these two websites to build up our database. What we really love about Common Lit is they have videos that then align to the stories that our students are reading, that engagement piece. They also have paired selections, who then once we find one story that matches our theme, they provide us with more stories that match our theme. And so we're really building up for our teachers that knowledge basis to continue to build more and more that our students know to utilize that key vocabulary. And who's helping with that course content creation? Our teachers are, but they're just so busy. So really we've been leaning on our librarians, our gifted teachers, our reading specialists that are really helping to build that course, that knowledge building content theme Canvas course for us. And we're really excited where it's going, and we feel like our students are definitely benefiting from it. So now that we have both the WOW course to connect knowledge and the content theme course, we have more than enough resources to continue to build our knowledge base. So kind of to end this, it's always important to reflect, what do we still need to do? And we still have a long journey ahead. So we've been at this a long time, and it's very important to always come back and reflect and think what you can do better. And we still have much to do. We need to simplify the MTSS process in the elementary schools. With the changing of that principal in that one building, we need to make sure that we're using consistent data forms, and we, because we still see different things happening in each building. And I'm sure, like many other schools, we do not have substitutes. And so sometimes with no substitutes, our data meetings get canceled, and we need to make sure that we do creative things to make sure that they are happening. No matter what, it has to be one of those things. Yesterday said non-negotiables. Our literacy block needs to be 120 minutes, non-negotiable, no matter what. And also we need to have continually our data meetings, no matter what. They have to happen, because we are still battling with that tier 1 issue. We have a core issue still. Specifically after we were home with COVID, we have definitely jumped back up, but we still have ways to go. We've got to get better, really, until all of our students are reading proficiently. We got to keep going. We need to transition MTSS to the middle high schools. We'd started there, but then with shifting with staff, it just did not happen successfly. How are we going to do that? We really need to provide staff training on PD Fridays. We're lucky enough that our students leave. They have an early release coming up this year. We used to have it in the past, but every Friday there will be about a 2-hour window where we will be able to provide professional development. We started that back in about 2011. And that is when our scores went up significantly, when we were able to train our staff consistently, when I talked about being consistent with professional development. So we're very excited to go back to our PD Fridays. We've had them sprinkled in on Wednesdays last year, but our parents actually, we provide we provide childcare for students who need to stay on Fridays to help accommodate families. And so it is something that many of our families actually appreciate and look forward to. If they cannot be home with their children, we take care of them for them and do activities. We do tutoring for families that are home. They look at it as a way to, go camping early on Friday. It's a time that grandma comes and visits on Friday with them. So we're looking forward to going back to our PD Fridays. We also need to prepare for that long-term goal of closing the gap. you know, we've seen positive growth, but what are we going to do to close that gap from kindergarten through 12th grade? And what I talked about is commit to those data meetings district-wide. They're happening at the elementary level, but not across the board. And we need to make sure that we have the same processes and procedures. And finally, after we have that in place this year, that's our main goal this summer to set up is, you know, run it for a year. And then we need to analyze the data, assess, make adjustments, implement again until we unlock every student's 5-pillar potential. It's just that continual. And as research changes, just like it has, it's just sort of that never ending. You know, I don't see it ending because we always want to get better for our students. So once again, analyze, assess, make adjustments, implement. It just never stops. Where do we go from here? I'd mentioned that my district has a STEAM Academy. And so as we talk about that RIASEC, students then move to the middle school and start talking about their career pathway. So you can see on the right-hand side, those are the career pathways that students start to talk about. I might be interested in these things and start taking courses along those lines. Even in middle school, they start taking introductory courses in those areas. That has been very helpful, and our students really love finding out what interests them and have said it's very helpful to find out what doesn't interest them, because many of them have thought they liked one thing, took an intro to health course and absolutely hated it and said, I think that I'm going to work in media. So we're helping our students learn earlier what they really like. On the left-hand side, our STEAM Academy, I have listed there all of the programs that we are offering our students in-house. We have biomedical, pathways to health, a SMART program, rising educator program to help with our teacher issue in Pennsylvania, cybersecurity program. We're actually working with the FBI and the White House, esports program, welding technology, and electrical occupations and power line. What I think is really interesting is next year, 44% of our 10th, 11th, and 12th graders are going to be enrolled in one of these programs, which I think is phenomenal. It just says what a great job these programs are doing for our students. And lastly, there is my contact information if anyone has any questions for me. And I sort of think I'm pretty close on time here to open up any questions that anyone has sort of about. I've kind of started this journey and moved all the way through, but any questions that anyone has about the journey that we have taken. And afterwards, if you can think of anything, I'm always open to an email or setting up a virtual call, because I must say that I have had and been so lucky to have so many people along this journey to help me, specifically through Patton. If it weren't for them, I really don't think we would be where we are today. And so if I can help anybody in any way, or at least brainstorm, I don't know everything, but I will definitely help you think through it. So please send me an email and we can work through and try to come up with a solution.